right, we are back, and I'm extremely excited because we have been trying to get this guest on for weeks. I think back in 2022 we even started, and I think it's extremely excited, and I've learned a lot from just reading her work, listening to her podcast, and seeing some of the work that she's doing not only with students but with teachers. And now we'll be at FETC sharing all of that with you. So finally, we get to welcome in Kayla Harlow to the Stronger Together podcast. So, Kayla, thanks for joining.
Yes, thanks for having me, and I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Absolutely. So, for those who don't know your work, talk a little bit about what you do and the work you're doing in education.
Of course. So I deem myself an early education advocate. So I do a lot of work across the board in literacy. And so that would be reading literacy, tech literacy, and social emotional literacy. I am talking about the intentional tech that we use with our youngest learners because they have very, very different needs than our older learners. And we want to make sure we address that from a fundamental stage. So I'm super passionate about it. And I help educators kind of learn where to start when implementing the technology.
And you bring up technology, and we're going to just kind of dive right into it.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about that technology is a tool, not a toy. And I read that on your website. What does that mean to you and to educators out there?
So it's really a mindset that when I was still in the classroom, we entered the school year with. I'm a former first grade teacher. I spent 10 years with first graders. I love them dearly. But a lot of the time, technology is implemented at home as a reward or a toy. And so we really had to reinforce the fact that it is a tool in the classroom to extend on our learning. It is not a reward or a toy or a free time activity for the most part. We would focus on creating a product or, a piece of work, and then they would submit it with their thinking, use technology as a tool like Seesaw to explain their thinking. So really a mindset shift for those young learners.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I found that on Kayla's website and the websites down below. There's so many great things on there as well. And one of the things I saw right away, and I want to ask you about, is you say, do you find balance in 21st century classrooms through multi-sensory learning? What does that mean for those who jump on and they're like, what does that mean?
So when I introduce myself, I say I'm an ed tech advocate, but I'm a limited screen time parent. So
Okay.
I find that it's so important to balance that hands-on learning aspect with the tech integration. And Ben Cogswell, Coach Ben, will address it as a blended classroom, blended learning with our young learners. I do a lot of professional development and coaching for hand to mind.
Okay.
Specifically in the literacy area in California. And they are purely a hands-on manipulative company. And so it's all about that balance and integrating everything. There's no replacement of anything else just because we're
Gotcha.
using technology.
That makes sense. And you talk a little bit about digital and print, and this is my spelling toolkit. So this is a combination of using it look like a tablet of some sort or iPod pad. How does that look when you said you're a limited screen time parent but a digital advocate? So
Right?
for those out there who are like, let me digest that. What does that mean?
So in the classroom, it is teaching students that we have these resources in our hands to expand outside the four walls of the classroom, right? Whether that's building background knowledge for students that are low SES or English language learners. And it is giving them that tool in their pocket to access things like that spelling toolkit.
Sure.
Typically in a first grade or kindergarten classroom, you'd have a word wall where everything is up there, but it can be overstimulating. So this is just what the children specifically need on a differentiated level, right, accessible on their, whether it's a tablet or a Chromebook. That version is specifically through Seesaw, and it can be found on my website. You can get it for free. And it's just a resource for children to have and know that it's accessible at any time that they need it.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no. But at home, for my children, I personally, they get enough screen time at school, especially because we're one-to-one. Most schools are with young learners post-pandemic, which is a blessing and a curse if teachers aren't educated in how to implement the technology. There's a lot of app babysitting going on. It's no fault to their own, but they just don't have the professional development to know how to really implement it in an intentional, mindful manner. So at home, I really encourage my kids to get off screens and get outside and play and things like that. So it's a balance.
Yes, so important. And Kayla talked about her website, which is scrolling below, but on there, not only will you see some of those resources through her blog and working with her, you have a podcast as well. So talk about that.
Yes, and first off, the website is a work in progress, so be patient with me.
Oh, it
But
looks great. It looks
oh,
great.
thank you. So I host the Intentional Tech podcast on behalf of Q, Computer Using Educators, and it focuses on how we use technology in those primary grades. So specifically, it was K2, but now it's TK through second grade.
Hmm.
Really even looking at the fundamentals of how our children's fine motor skills are different at that stage and how they navigate a piece of technology, not only mentally, but physically being able to drag and drop and things like that. So I just facilitate conversations with tech leaders in that early ed tech world. And I love it so much. I think that having important conversations are so great and give so many ideas and refresh our inspiration when we're feeling burnt out in the classroom. So
No, I agree. And I think one of the things I really like, so if you visit the website, you also can sign up for the newsletter. And there's this great Canva handbook and talks about intentional tech. And you go through being efficient and effective and engaging and enriching. So, like the 4 E's, and talk about how you came to that framework.
So I started implementing technology in my classroom back in 2015. I used Donors Choose to get iPads for my students. I just wanted 6 for centers,
Perfect.
but we had a donor offer to supply us with one-to-one, which was such a blessing.
I can
But
imagine.
yes, but I had no professional development. Although my district was wonderful, they did not have a strong ed tech presence or mentorship. And so
Sure.
I was left to navigate that on my own and through trial and error. Lots of error to begin with. I found what those young learners need to really get the most out of that technology. And so the intentional tech roadmap just walks you through really the thought process and the pedagogy behind how to use technology with our young learners and how to implement routines and structures in order to have a transferable application between hands-on learning. Like I do a lot of work in science of reading and phonics and phonemic awareness. So there's
Sure.
Conan boxes, sound boxes that we practice our phonics with, and being able to do that hard copy at the beginning of the week and then transfer that into reinforcing it on Seesaw independently in centers or at home with families. So really going through all aspects of using the technology, but really always having intention and a purpose behind it.
That's great. So make sure to head over to the site, sign up for the newsletter. This is just a quick screenshot of one of the great pages from that handbook. So I want to transition to New Orleans, which is coming up in a few days for some of us. So talk about what your work is going to be down there.
So, first off, I am so happy it's in New Orleans. New Orleans is where my heart was set on fire for education. I
Really?
spent,
Okay.
yeah, there's a whole story behind it.
All right.
I spent 5 years, I'll be short-ish. I spent five
Go.
years
It's your
over
time.
the summers going to New Orleans, working in the inner city schools, specifically right after Hurricane Katrina. And I was going to do the Teach NOLA program once I graduated college, and then I got married, and then it was a whole thing. So I pursued it back in California.
Okay.
But just seeing how school was the safe place for those most at-risk students and how much they appreciated learning is really close to my heart. So while I'm in New Orleans, I am sitting on the Literacy Leadership Roundtables, which I am excited to learn about that format because I know that's a new format for FETC.
It is, yeah.
And sitting with and talking with some national administrators around what technology and literacy and the integration look like right now. There's a lot of talk about, you could call them reading wars, you could call them pendulum swinging between balanced literacy and science of reading. But politics and things aside, I have been teaching with science of reading since 2017. And so that was prior to a lot of this conversation. So I take part in California in a lot of advocacy work in the science of reading. So it's me merging my two worlds of intentional tech and structured literacy. And so I look forward to having those conversations and helping administrators learn different ways that they can not only implement science of reading resources, but integrate it with their technology programs.
Awesome. So if you're down there, make sure to check that out because you're also doing Soar with Seesaw. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes. So that's going to be the literacy leadership roundtable. So
Awesome.
that's what I'm going to focus on is integrating the seesaw activities with the science of reading practices.
Wow. So that's like an app smash and just bringing that in there. That is
Yes.
awesome. So if you're down there on Wednesday at 1:00, make sure to head on over to see this great conversation and to see all the resources as well. And when people leave, when they say, "Oh, I was in that session," what will they say about it?
Hopefully they will feel inspired to take actionable step the next day. My whole goal is to streamline these big topics into actionable steps that they can really take back to their teachers. And one, realize the power of Tequity and the right to read. If you're not familiar with the hashtag or the documentary, you should look it up. There's a lot of work around literacy as a civil right. So tech literacy and reading literacy, and hopefully just motivated to take action the next day and keep the conversation going with me because I love networking. I love following up with attendees and just kind of learning from everyone as well as getting inspired.
That is great. So one of the things I always am curious about, because people learn in so many different ways. You share all of this work and some of the research and these strategies and combining technology and hands-on learning. Where do you learn and how do you grow?
That's a fabulous question.
Oh, thank you.
Through a lot of conversation and networking like this, and then also being involved with, and it sounds so silly, at least kind of to me, is heavily involved in like Facebook groups and talking with teachers across the nation on and listening to what their problems and struggles are. And then I also have my foot in the industry when I work with companies like Hand to Mind. So
Mhm.
really kind of tying together all of the separate groups and hearing all the common problems is what causes me or inspires me to do more research into certain areas. So yeah.
I like it. So for those who are interested in the topic, they come to your session and the vendor floor is enormous and massive. What are some, you mentioned Seesaw, what are some of the other tools that you recommend?
So Seesaw is what I focus on, but like I said, and it's the limited screen time parent in me is also the Hand to Mind hands-on resources, which I'll have some examples at my session of. So it's integrating the two. And
Awesome.
for that aspect, those are the two that I really advocate for. I know there's some awesome programs that are constantly being developed, but I can't speak to them as much as I really focus in on Seesaw because it really does everything the little kids need. And I always try to keep my students on minimal platforms because they tend to get lost in
Yes,
out
I
in the
can
world
imagine.
of technology. So my focus is really streamlining. So
I like it.
Seesaw all the way.
Awesome. And if you want to check out Hand to Mind, the Twitter pages is there as well as Kayla's Twitter handle that is scrolling through the bottom. Check out all the resources. Make sure to see her down at FETC. Look through all the work that she has on her website because it's pretty amazing. So last question, I want to know, as you talk about working with multiple groups, Hand in Mind and Seesaw and different groups as well in the work that you do, what does Stronger Together mean to you?
Stronger together means exactly what we are doing right now. And it's just having those important conversations. And no matter where you are in the education industry, we all have different perspectives. We all have different strengths, different challenges, and coming together and talking about those and learning from one another. I would never consider myself an expert in anything because that means I have nothing left to learn. So I constantly sit there as an advocate. That is what I am here to do, is advocate for research but based best practices and learn from my colleagues constantly. So, and I think that that's a good position for everyone to be in, knowing that we always have more to learn and can learn from each other. So stronger together.
Awesome. Well, I like that. I'm glad we were able to make it work. I know you're out on the West Coast time. I'm out here on East Coast, but we finally made it work. And I look forward to continuing to follow your work, getting your newsletters, and seeing the great work that you do, and get a chance to meet you in person down in New Orleans.
Yes, I'm so excited, and I am a solo traveler out there. So if you want to connect or network, you can reach out to me on Twitter, and I'm happy to meet in person and learn from all y'all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining. And for those heading down to New Orleans, this is the last podcast not on site. So I'm excited you wrapping us up and going out with a bang for sure. So we look forward to seeing you down there. And for those watching and listening, remember to continue to stay together, because we do that when we are stronger together and we put we over me. Kayla, we'll see you down in New Orleans.
Awesome. See you there.
See ya.
Thank you.